read out the questions, and then it's, boom, away you go. It's unscripted, it is off the cuff, and, I'm just interested in your opinions about everything. Yeah. And I'll kind of monitor with the time, so I'll be sitting down here, so kind of thinking about what we need to move to the next question. The last question is kind of just a softball, right, an easy one. And then Sakrayan, who wasn't able to make it, has just asked for 5 minutes at the very end. And if we run over, we run over. It's just the executive meeting afterwards. Does that make sense? She's going to join for 5 minutes after. At the end. Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah. And that, I think, is the plan. I'm still trying to sort that out.
It's like we all agreed to wear nearly white, except you.
Yeah, I got to be different. I miss that one.
Also because it's better with the
Follow
sun.
the crowd.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm curious. Why follow the crowd?
Exactly. Again, there you go. Yeah.
Okay. Hello, everyone.
Right with yours.
We've almost made it through the whole week.
We are so humble.
Counting down the minutes here. But I hope that everyone has had an absolutely fantastic time here. We have all, on the organizing committee, have just loved having each and every one of you here and just talking to y'all. And it's been, for us at least, very tiring, but very fulfilling. So thank you so much for coming here. Of course, you can clap. Couple of quick housekeeping notes before we get on to our plenary speakers. First thing is I just want to remind everyone that afterward, the reason why we scheduled the plenary before the SAfA business meeting is because you are now trapped in here, so you can't leave. So if you're thinking of skipping out, no, of course you can leave if you need to. But afterward, directly afterward, we have the SAfA business meeting where all sorts of really cool and juicy secrets about SAfA and other things, I guess, are going to be revealed. And then there will be a short break and dinner. Dinner is going to be down in the same white tents where we've been having the lunches and the coffee breaks and everything. Is going to be a really nice, very casual affair. I'm looking forward to that. Okay, a couple of other things. First of all, if you are going on the Ancestor Tribute tomorrow, please don't forget to meet at the Peña bus stop. So that's the bus stop right over by the white tents where we have lunch at 10:30. I've put a Google link in the email that you received, but if you need further instructions, I'm happy to point that out. But it's just up and above that. For the excursion on Sunday, same location, the same bus stop, but at 9 o'clock. So again, I can help with that. If you need an invoice, like so many of you do, and keep emailing about that, just want to let you all know that the university who is creating those invoices outside of the SAfA committee is working very hard on that. Those will be generated as quickly as possible, and we will get them to you as quickly as possible. So apologies for any delays. It's on the way. Haven't forgotten about that. And lastly, I have really great news to send you all off back to your homes. We just learned that as of midnight tonight, there's going to be strikes at all airports across Portugal. Surprise! I know. I'm really sorry. What we know, and we don't know a lot yet, is that it affects all baggage handlers, all ground crews, all check-in, and all airplane logistics, whatever that means. And the news that we've gotten says to keep a really close eye with your airline on your flights to make sure that they are not canceled or modified, and get to the airports early. And this apparently does include the Faro Airport. So apologize about that, and I hope that everyone has an easy trip back to their country or wherever you guys are from. All right, so let's get on with our plenary on that happy note. So today we have many of our keynote speakers that you have heard throughout the week. Cressida, Alman and Kayla, Sada Mire. And then in addition to that, we have two additional speakers. Shadrach Chakuri, he is the Edward Hall Professor of Archaeological Science and the Director of the Research Laboratory at the University of Oxford. And we have Zerai Alamseged. And Zerai, oh, sorry Zerai, I had your stuff right here. There we go. I know most of it, but I just don't want to mess it up, is a paleoanthropologist and the Donald Pritzker Professor at the University of Chicago. And among other things, he's elected and serves as the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and a member of the Pontifical Academy of Science, Vatican Fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and a member of the Ethiopian Academy of Science. So, Shadrach and Zerai, welcome. And today, the way that we are going to do this is that we have a couple of questions. They're very broad questions. They touch upon many different issues. There are no right answers that we are looking for, and we actually haven't told any of the plenary speakers here what these questions are. We want to get their off-the-cuff, raw responses. You know? All right, so let's kick this off. Are you guys ready? Oh, and yeah, you got those on. Okay, fantastic. All right, so question number one. How can local and indigenous communities effectively protect and manage their cultural heritage when they often face systemic barriers to participation in decision-making processes? These gaps between communities and the government institutions or international organizations that set heritage policies can lead to exclusion, misrepresentation, or loss of control over their own histories and traditions. In this context, what responsibilities do archaeologists have, and paleoanthropologists, as professionals who frequently advise on heritage laws and policies while also building close relationships with local and indigenous groups? How can archaeologists support more inclusive, equitable, and community-centered approaches to heritage protection? Take it away.
God bless you. Everyone. No, no pressure. Nobody wants to go?
Ladies first.
Gosh, that's a very challenging question. I don't know if I caught all of it, but what responsibility do archaeologists have? I think the way we conduct archaeology, I think there needs to be probably a bit more awareness of codes of ethics, and we should probably have guidelines into when we get into areas of conflict. Where I work in the Horn of Africa, we have multiple complex emergencies. So you have poverty, you have recurrent droughts, famine, wars and conflict, and you also have political crisis. So right off the bat, you are already having to be responsible in how you present yourself and how you conduct archaeology already. And things unfold, and I think often we don't go into an active conflict, but we are often in times where it's building up to a conflict or in the aftermath of a conflict. So in the case of Somaliland, obviously it was post-conflict situation, and priorities were about food, security, shelter, and trying to show people what archaeology can do in terms of moving away from the antiquity side of archaeology to the usefulness of the past, especially in a conflict situation or other crisis environment. What can we learn from archaeology? That use of archaeology, those uses of archaeology, I think, need to be communicated. Leave it at that.
All right, thank you. Well, now that she's done the hard job, I will just build on that. Thank you. Well, I think before that, I want to thank Eric and all organizers for inviting me, especially to be here in the plenary session, even though it's my first SAfA ever. So thanks for welcoming me. I hope you are welcoming me. So the very loaded question that Eric asked. In the country that I live in the US, the people in real estate, they say location, location, location. And in this question, it's going to be context, context, context. There is no one-fits-all solution in terms of integrating or incorporating locals or the people who live in the sites in the countries that we work on, that we will be able to apply if we are going to be efficient, effective, but also remain as close to the scientific methods that we would like to apply. And by that, what I mean is, well, I'll give you an anecdote. The ideas that we have as archaeologists or paleontologists or paleoanthropologists, even philosophically speaking, as people who believe in and accept equality, equity, democracy, and all of that, unless we understand the local context, it's not going to work. When I started working in remote places in Ethiopia, where I actually also have some conflicts, local conflicts, when I was hiring people, of course, coming wearing my Western hat, I wanted to have 5 female and 5 males in my team. But the context didn't favor that situation. I couldn't hire the females because they have already an established context as to how they navigate the daily life landscape. This is in the Afar region, for example. So I think understanding the context is very important. But how do you engage and make them part of the endeavor is going to require both understanding their local narrative, especially in terms of archaeology. They have a say in what is that we tell stories in terms of the narrative. So what I would say is navigate between how the community sees itself within the landscape of what we do, but also maintaining an integrated but also scientific approach to answering those questions. So I would say that involving, therefore, locals in the process, not only as assistants, not only as a logistics people, but also really making sure that in the long run, they will be part and parcels of the scientific process itself. Again, going back to my example, maybe Eric, you know this, if you go back when Steve, who was honored yesterday, started his research in the 1970s, there were no many Ethiopians involved in the scientific research. Now you have numerous people not only engaging in the scientific discourse as you see it here in SAfA, but also leading and promoting their own project at the highest level. So that's why I say it's contextual. understanding the cultural complexities of the locals, but also really knowing that ultimately the questions that we ask are pertinent to humanity. Yes, there are local answers to local questions, but ultimately the process of archaeology and paleontology and paleoanthropology is an endeavor to understand the human question. But the human question in its diversity and complexity is what I think is the right context, at least as a starter. Thank you.
I'm trying to tell him that gender balance
Yes,
will
yes.
play here.
Understood.
My apology. Eric, thank you very much for that very complex question. Coming from the Namibian context, and probably many African and Southern African countries, we have experienced this. The system, for example, of apartheid, what it's really done in Namibia and in South Africa in particular, was quite damaging in terms of culture. And one of the issues is that communities were really displaced from their ancestral land, particularly the descendant of the hunter-gatherers and many other groups like the herders and so forth. Very few are still living in areas where archaeological sites are now. But I'm very happy that the legislation, the National Heritage Act, really pay particular attention also to the local community, especially even though, because heritage, you know, is not static. It's something that is continuously moving constantly. So a lot of community now that lives near archaeological sites, they have inherited that heritage, although a different group have authored what we are part of, what have created or what was left at those archaeological sites. And in doing so, the survival of those archaeological sites largely depend on those communities. And they continue to survive. And this is also the reason why a lot of cases that are happening in terms of development encroaching into the site, any other damage and so forth, their communities are quite very active. They don't know most of the time what archaeological sites are, but they do know that this place, sacred site of our ancestors, although they have a limited understanding. Some they do, and some have actually started inheriting this particular heritage to become part of theirs now. Now, what can we do as archaeologists? I do believe that in order to rectify what was done before, we need to look at our respective heritage instrument and see whether they really do support community involvement, not just in terms of protection, but really involving them in managing the site. For instance, in Namibia, we have so many archaeological sites, but only 8 have been declared as National Heritage Site because they have been well documented. And 8 of those, the Namibian government only managed 2, which is the Brandberg Mountain and also the Tweefontein World Heritage Site. The rest of them fall under community management, and that is already empowerment. So what we normally do as archaeologists, the Namibian government, for example, does not earn any income from those sites because the aim is not to generate anything for the government in terms of taxes or whatever, but it's to empower community to benefit from that particular resource. So the involvement of the government as far as it's concerned is just to help the community to understand, to do more research in terms of understanding the value associated with that particular heritage resource, monitoring the condition of those sites, and also just providing technical assistance on how to manage the site properly so that it's preserved for the future generation. And I think that understanding came from our history, understanding that our stories, especially a lot of intangible heritage sites, were disconnected and they were not protected. As a result, they thought the need to continue or to legalize the importance of including the local community into the managing of the site. Now, the biggest issue in our case is the fact that archaeology is still a discipline which is not well known. So in terms of protection, it is protected legally, and we are doing quite a lot, but I just feel like we need, as archaeologists, we need to write more. And we need to write not just scientific journal when we do excellent excavation, excellent research, but we need to start writing, speaking to non-archaeologists. Whether it's politicians, whether it's other fellow educators, whether it's children, you will be amazed how much our children don't know about our own heritage. You will be shocked when you go to respective community and they don't even know that they have this important heritage resource in their community. So we need to start writing, and this is, I feel like this is urgent. If we can share information of what we have, publish school books so that heritage become part of the educational curriculum, I think we are going to bridge a lot of gaps within the society, and the more we build bridges, the more we create massive awareness, and the more protection in large, and the more community benefit, and the more we protect the site. The other thing that I wanted to mention, let me just see if I have everything in order, my apologies, is to, legislation. Yeah, is to, for instance, we have so much archaeological site that the community that are thought to have produced the art no longer live in those respective sites. A case in point is the descendant of hunter-gatherers in Namibia, which is the oldest, tribe in the world, that is the San people. Some call them Bushmen. I don't like that. It's quite derogatory. San is also not a right word, but we have to call them somehow. We are all people from the bush. Anyway, I do feel like they need to be empowered, because these are the people that have lost more. If you look at, for example, the emergence of whether it's Bantu or any other group within Africa, particularly in Southern Africa, we are all foreigners in Southern Africa. If we look at the data, archaeological data, I mean, the most critical thing right now in Southern Africa is the question of land. Who owns the land? In my country, it's the hottest topic. In South Africa, it's the hottest topic, where people are fighting for land. So archaeologists, we have a responsibility to sort of like bring this data to our respective platform, especially national platform, and start talking and diffuse the situation to say, the Bantu, the which other group, you came here when, archaeological record says otherwise. Because the original inhabitant of this country are these individuals, but they don't have a voice. They don't complain about anything. They don't fight about anything. But they are in conservancies. They are pushed somewhere, they are living somewhere. I'm not sure if you understand the context, but it's hard for them. But as archaeologists, we have the right to bring this data back to the society so that we can bring our people together and say, it's not worth it. If we were really to say this group was here first, archaeological record will say otherwise. And if it does say otherwise, should we continue the divide? Should we continue the fight? Is it worth it? No. But we need to, it is our responsibility. These are tough discussions. These are difficult discussions. But I do feel like it's high time that we bring this narrative at a national level. Because if our people don't know, they don't know. Because many believe the history of our countries begin with a historical period. No. It started with paleontology, then archaeology, and then other things. It's much bigger than us. So, but they don't know. So it's our responsibility, collective responsibility, to make sure that these narratives are at the forefront of our national development. I think I can end here for now. Hello.
I don't know that I have a huge amount to add, actually. Of course, I have a huge respect for the colleagues who have spoken before me, and I certainly agree with a lot of that, what's been said. I just find it a little bit, and it's not my intention to be combative at all, but is it the right question that you're asking us? Because you sort of point us towards indigenous and descendant archaeologists as being the ones who, and I really respect the fact that you said you're already facing a certain amount of even internal, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not marginalization, but trust me, I think we could all probably speak to the fact that if you're working outside of your own country, you face a particular challenge from being seen as somebody outside. When you are trying to engage with your local government, I mean, just a really basic level on the fact that the fact that you're from that country means that you're going to receive less respect in whatever profession, no matter where you've achieved, compared to somebody who's coming from outside and who isn't the same complexion as you. So that's sort of one dimension of what you're speaking about. Like I said to you, I respect the fact that you pointed it out, but is it not the responsibility of everybody who works in Africa to take on board, both in the sense of, in some cases, relinquishing some of the position and also allowing some gap to some space to be created for an actual change? And I agree exactly, entirely with what you said in the sense of context. I'm going to be speaking from a particular context. Mauritius didn't exist before colonialism. There was no indigenous population. And to have seen the change, particularly recently, that's come about at the level of the government, where there really is much less time for people of a certain, landowners, because there's an understanding that the vast majority, the 98% of the population who are not of French or British descent, should have more of a voice in what's being said across the country, not just within the context of something like cultural heritage. And funny enough, I very quickly spoke about the figures and the numbers of people who are now coming to heritage sites. I actually think it's what's happened at the level of the government and just a general breathing away. And I may actually, if you don't mind, I'll use you, thank you, in the sense of the excellent talk. I learned so much, but I was so surprised at the number of times, and you've explained why, but there's an apology to speaking the truth. Oh, there are communities who came from, there are people who came from Europe and did things in these countries. So, as I said to you, not my intention to be combative, but at the end of the day, science is colonial. Archaeology is colonial. We're working within that system. I've heard so many times X, Y, and Z is an exemplar of colonial. As archaeologists working in these countries, the vast majority of people I speak to may well be interested in an aspect of cultural heritage, but archaeology means very little to them. And I don't know that it's my job to force that onto them. I certainly want to completely agree. I've been in situations where people have had, La Réunion, for example, where they've had zero knowledge of their context of indenture or the context of enslavement. It's been French history that's been taught to them. And I think those are fundamentally problematic. So the educational side of it is really important in terms of bringing knowledge. But I really struggle with thinking, because there's, maybe back to Mira's point, that there's some really fundamental things taking place, and archaeology doesn't elevate itself up. So perhaps what we can do is to, because of course the past is important, the sense that I had when I was in the UK and doing my education there, that archaeology exists because we reveal stories about the past, has always been a bit of a challenge for me. Archaeology, why should it be a subject of the past when it has so much potential and so much opportunity for informing us about what's going on today and supporting us into the future? And I'm sorry, I'm sure you've heard that so many times. I don't mean to repeat something, but there really is a moment when we start talking to people locally in a different way and identify, as you've said, the utility of archaeology. And we've been having a little back and forth, so I'll just sort of add this point so that we can maybe you'll pick it up, but I don't actually think science is the only way that we can sort of integrate. I do agree science is one of the ways, but what archaeology I think can do for us is open up all sorts of other opportunities, not only for integrative research and really sharing capacity across global north, global south divides, but actually finding ways to support local resilience in communities through cultural heritage tourism, developing and actually valorizing your way of knowing the world, not just through a scientific approach, which some people can actually have access to, but is going to keep other people out. It could be an incredibly unifying and salient discipline, and I think that some of that context could come into the work that we do, not just as people who are from the countries, but also those who are from outside.
Certainly, it was not my plan to have the last word on the topic. But Eric, what ChatGPT did not tell you about my bio is that I come from a prominent traditional family, wherever I come from. So I would like to flip around your question and answer it from the point of view of the community. And the first thing is that, that I can say is that archaeologists overrate themselves. Yeah. They overinflate their power, significance, and influence, right? And the reality of the matter is that if archaeologists do not, or paleontologists, sorry, buddy, do not find ways of empowering communities, then those communities will find ways of going ahead without archaeologists. That's what you are complaining about. You know, these sites, everything, life goes on, you know. As a traditional authority, I don't care about you guys, sorry. So what this means is that we need a moment of self-reflection, and we need a moment of action. You mentioned the point about archaeology being a colonial subject, science being extractive, right? So how can we do things differently in ways that communities can also see value in what we do, so that they can also identify, you know, how do we say to them who have no bread that we look after rock art? How do we say to them who have been affected by drought that we study and exist? Sorry to my Stone Age archaeologist colleagues. But from the point of being a member of the community and a person that is entrusted with making a decision on behalf of thousands of people, surely if all you are telling me is typology this, typology that, and I need to feed people, why should I listen to you? So these are the realities. These are the realities that confront us. Can we change the way in which we do the discipline? What new skills do we need to incorporate in our curriculum so that when we teach the young, when we teach the old, at least we can empower those communities and we can ensure that their aspirations are aligned with their interests. If we lose that, I'm sorry, as communities, we will go ahead without you guys.
If I ever have to organize another SAfA, I'm going to make sure that the plenary is at least 3 hours long because I have so many follow-up questions. And I am just loving everything that you guys are saying. I'd like to take a short break from what you guys are saying right now to open up the floor to any audience questions. I'm sure there might be a couple. Audience questions? None? None? Okay. Oh, have a question back here. I know, I want to hear more what they have to say too, but.
Maybe my question goes too far and needs too many answers again. But we have been discussing this topic among colleagues many times with a lot of different suggestions and views. There is one very evident problem. I loved your last phrase, we will do it without you, if. It's already happening. And here is the problem. It is legitimate that it happens. Archaeologists, paleontologists, and other allied researchers like myself are working on bringing knowledge to partners, very different kinds of partners. At some point, the partners are bored and say, no, we have this and this nationalist narrative, and you're not feeding us. Go away with your knowledge. And I'm extremely frustrated observing that those whom I perceive as partners perceive me as someone who doesn't deliver something fitting to their narratives, so I'm not important anymore. Which means modernization of communities is going on in a very unexpected way. Local nationalisms, local structures which are against knowledge. We have it in Europe, we have it in the US without any doubt, but we have it also in non-European countries. So now this legitimate discourse about communities taking over is in fact by itself again taken over by other actors who are counter-knowledge actors. What do you do out of that? Not in all cases, but you see the problem. I wanted to mention the problem.
Sorry, why should you think that your knowledge is important than our knowledge? And why should you think that, it's your duty or it's our duty to listen to your knowledge, but you cannot take ours?
Fantastic answer, thank you.
So I will agree with Shadrik, or I think Krish. We do get inflated sometimes. And again, that takes me back to the question of context. It's because we want to think about archaeology, even science for that matter, within a context of the big picture. So I realize that. Going back to that comment and your comment also, I remember as an anecdote, the Ethiopian government at some point decided to export Lucy to the US for 5 years. And it triggered a huge conversation among scientists and the public. And the minister asked me, is this the right thing to do? Well, I did not have an answer, but my colleagues on the science side were saying it's not right unless there is a compelling scientific reason. Well, then I challenge them. How about if there is a compelling national cause? Do you tell the policymaker your opinion doesn't matter, or the public your opinion doesn't matter? So I think what we need to do, therefore, in that context was to navigate between the public interest, it could be indigenous interest, and the scientific interest. And then we have a conversation. And that's why I think platforms like SAfA and many others are really important. That's what we did, for example, working with my Kenyan colleague Emma and Brianna, who is here. We created an East African Association as a platform to bring in policymakers and scientists and to talk about those issues by also incorporating locals from the places that we conduct research at. So again, that's why I said the context, and one answer gives us answer to everything is not the right thing. So I would like to underscore. I think, Krish, where I would depart from your comment, characterizing archaeology and science as colonial, I think it's wrong, in my opinion. What's right is using science and archaeology for colonial purposes is wrong. But I think science is meant to be agnostic, meaning you can use it left or right, backwards or forwards. So the way it's been used as an instrument for colonial purposes, even archaeology, that's wrong. I would not go out on TV and tell an African kid science is colonial. I think that would be detrimental to that child and to Africa and many countries that are struggling to develop economically and technologically, because without science, I don't think even archaeology will sustain. That's what I would say. Thank you.
Go ahead.
I am sitting between Krish and Sare, and I want to say both that, yes, science is colonial, but to Krish, I would like to say, don't end it there, say why it's colonial.
Okay.
That way, you can help people to move forward.
Okay. I think.
Can I just say?
Oh, yes.
So I want to make my own little contribution to the why. So we're talking about archaeology, and archaeological methods are also part of paleontological methods. So, when I spoke yesterday, I talked about how Somalis were indifferent to archaeology, and that heritage for them was knowledge, things that they make, the environment, the landscape, their poetry, the language, all the archives within that language, and that even literacy becomes something that we have to look at as an addition to the human computer, and that human computer in many traditional societies was used so much that today, because of literacy has actually reduced what we can use for our brains. I won't go too much into that, but when I asked people, these objects are lost, that museum is looted, that site's gone, what they talked about was, no, it's not. We know how to make that. So the science bit comes in where actually this object, its date, where it comes from, is important to us because we can draw some knowledge and information from that. But at the same time, the way that archaeology is taking place in a place like Africa is colonial because we use certain archaeological methodology as the center of knowledge. Excavation, for example, has become the key way of extracting knowledge, as if what people know from that landscape, the languages that they speak, we have called them anthropology or ethno. We have to qualify it. It can't really be archaeology, because archaeology you have to dig. And you can't be an archaeologist unless you're excavating. The locals don't have the resources to excavate. Teaching somebody to excavate takes a course of 6 months. But learning the landscape, learning the languages, learning the use of the resources, conducting the rituals, living in that landscape, it takes a lifetime of knowledge. So it's what we accentuate, what we carry as the actual valued archaeological methodologies. I believe archaeology should not be the first thing we do. Excavation should not be the first thing we do. It, in fact, should be the last thing we do. Instead, now, we start with a dig. We have no idea about their languages. We have no idea about anything they do. We have a GPS, and we are going to dig there.
I could take the easy way out and say the roots of science are colonial. Would you? But I suppose we've got a few minutes, have we? Yuval Harari's idea that the birth of science is the recognition of human ignorance is the point at which, if I say to you, what's a tree, you'll all tell me a leaf and chlorophyll and so on, and nobody has an idea what a tree actually is in the context of something meaningful and beyond simply its value as resource or whatever it is. We've defined knowledge into quite specific ways, and we increasingly use science to do that. And I wonder if we need to keep a new instrument to tell us things that we probably know already. And the vast majority of people I meet don't use science as a day-to-day tool. And sometimes the things that they say may not absolutely, align with a scientific context as we might understand it, but it's certainly their right to have their knowledge. And more and more, when we, I couldn't agree more with you in the sense of it's a particularly important problem in Africa, I think, because at least in other parts of the world, an indigenous perspective on how deep ground-penetrating radar goes into the soil and what it does to the concept of nature, how it might damage the earth, is actually taken into account, at least in some contexts in the US, whereas here we've just, sorry, not here, we're in Portugal, but often in Africa we just sort of, at least in the parts of the world I work in, we've just decided that that is the right approach. And so, I'll give some context. The idea that a scientific approach obfuscates or overshadows other ways of knowing, other things that have to be done before you can excavate, before you touch the ground, before you open up an excavation. I mean, that's where I'm talking about in terms of science. And if you are sort of unwilling to agree with me that so much of what's done in the name of science that is entirely unrelated to paleontology or archaeology is so massively detrimental to the communities and the environment, based on an ideology of materialism and capitalism, and using science in service for those ideologies, then you and I will agree to disagree. And if we then use scientific approaches in archaeology in more, I use the word innocuous, but in less prominent ways that don't develop money in the same way or don't have the same political impact or climatic impact, we're using them, we're kind of legitimizing approaches that ultimately can be damaging at the other end of the scale when, we think that the answer to climatic problems is more technology or more science rather than mindset change, rather than coming back and talking to the majority of people who don't use science on a day-to-day basis, but who we've decided unless we've got a scientific outcome, we can't actually appeal to them. We can't actually change the way they think about things as we continue to cause damage. I hope that just gives a little bit of qualification. Sorry.
I'd like to keep this conversation going, but I have another very complex, multi-part question for you guys. But wow, I mean, this is fantastic. I'm loving this. All right, so as you all know, the theme for this year's SAfA is Crossroads through time. And so the next question is that we wanted to focus on the issue of movements of people. So the movements of people, whether forced or voluntary, has become an increasingly common phenomenon in the modern world. This movement is driven by a complex interplay of factors, including economic instability, armed conflict, environmental degradation, and the growing impact of climate change. Archaeologists often emphasize that a primary goal of their work is to understand the past in order to shed light on the present, to offer insights into our collective future. However, beyond academic insight, what are the real, actionable ways that members of the archaeological community can address the issues of displacement that dominate so much public discourse today? In other words, how can the knowledge gained from archaeology and from the broader humanities and social sciences be translated to meaningful strategies that engage contemporary crises of mobility and uprootedness? Go for it.
I'll start at this end then, shall I? Unless somebody else would. I think that's a reason, I don't know, I find that, I think I'll just come back a little bit to work that we're doing, but I think that understanding diaspora has so many implications across so many dimensions of society, whether it is finding your position in the world, trying to explain at one level some of the complexities of people who have been displaced and sort of been displaced once and then been displaced again because of ideologies about how there's a better life in parts of Europe that have a colonial connection to wherever you come from or wherever you happen to be. So there's this kind of factor that bridges between the past and the present. And if we look at some of the conditions of people who are, I've just lost you, sorry, but a lot of what a lot of the diasporas in the past have been to do with labor. And that continues today. And I think, unfortunately, we don't really see enough in terms of how the past, because we've sort of thought about specific iterations of things like enslavement or indenture, but we don't see how much those things are affecting us in the present day and how many people are being displaced continuously because of the same ideologies. And I really urge us to think more about, again, I think your point is really well made. What can archaeologists actually do? But some of that knowledge needs to come out and show the relationships between past and present. This maybe links to something you mentioned earlier about sort of influencing policy. I think history, archaeology has huge opportunity to influence policy if we're able to make that transition and show that there are precedents. I also think that there's genuinely a moment where people are starting to accept that cultural dimensions, cultural resources, that includes your past, includes your movement, are incredibly important and actually help us to bring knowledge about our movements in a way that we hadn't. There's been a long period where people who were moving to Europe from parts of Africa for the better life, or the US, or wherever it is, they really cut themselves off from their past. And that's somewhat changing now. I think there is a sense of connection. But on a scientific side, and I think really key, is to use some of that information about diaspora, about where you come from, to help inform on a really fundamental level what your exposure to disease is going to be, what your likelihood of the impact on you from a disease like COVID is differential depending on where you come from. What are the implications for things like chronic disease or for diabetes, et cetera, et cetera. There's so much wealth of information in there because we understand DNA is more than your point of origin, that at least on a scientific basis, I'm all for science, I'm just trying to come back to you a little bit here. We stay friends. That there is an opportunity as well to use really structurally significant information from archaeology in a way that's beneficial on a much grander scale. And also just to inform us away from what we know from history, to sort of challenge and supplement maybe, but certainly to challenge what we know, what we've been told about our own migrations and our own mobility. So much of information about our past has not really much to do with us as individuals, and how do we bridge those scales? And I think some work on diaspora and so on could be really beneficial there. I'll stop.
Okay. Thank you very much. Well, this is a very complicated question for me. I'm sorry, Chris. Part of that is because I have briefly talked about our issue, what happened to us, and issues of mobilities and displacement. We have been a society that have been displaced for more than a century, basically. So, and we are still struggling to sort of find our own feet on the ground still. And part of that is because where our ancestors were, we are no longer living there, and so forth and so forth. We have a lot of problems among each other because we don't understand each other and so forth. But I think in terms of understanding what we can do as archaeologists to sort of bridge these gaps is to continue talking. I mean, people have always been on a move as a result of population expansion, as a result of problems in the land. It can be famine, it can be drought, it can be so many things. We have always been on the move. And I think we need to understand that it's part of a human thing to keep being on the move. So I don't want to talk so much about the current migration and so forth, but I always, as an archaeologist, I'm not self-inflated, but I always want to understand or to say, I always have an issue with visas, for example, because I feel like it's one of those things that are really restrictive in terms of, and this is the reason why we have so many diseases, so many things we can't solve, because we are static now. Our movements are limited, our movements are restricted. From prehistory, we have always been on the move, and we need to continue being on the move, integrate, become a better generation in terms of our capacity, in terms of our health, in terms of, we have always been on the move, and I feel like we can know what we have done before if we still don't talk about it. Part of that is because we don't know that we have always been on the move. How did our ancestors survive harsh climatic conditions? How did they avoid or address problems in our own society? It's because people have been talking, and I think we need to start communicating information of what our discipline can bring into the society, solving our own problems and so forth. I think I can. Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
I'm not anti-archaeologist.
You are an archaeologist.
It's just that I'm a member of the community, that's all.
So am I.
But why do people move, right? And why are there limits to movement? And of course, you mentioned the very valid point about visas, right? So many people who could have attended this conference they could not come because their passport is of a different color. and it has a different, it's signed by a different person, right? These are the limits to mobility and to movement. And I think archaeologists see one of our main problems, as far as I'm concerned, is that we talk a lot and don't do anything at all. So right now, we are high-fiving each other, right? Oh, great, oh, great, oh, great. If I were to ask you that, what will change after we leave this room? Can you give me anything? Right. The other point is that we are good at talking to ourselves. We preach to the converted. We all have the same thinking, Isn't it high time that we bring people that matter to these discussions? Where are the decision makers on the ground? The people that sit on the UN, the people that sit on the African Union, those ambassadors that make decisions that affect us. Maybe it's also befitting that we are a Congress dedicated to the study of Africa, but is meeting in Portugal to discuss issues that are meant to influence people in Africa. So that's the challenge that we find ourselves in. So to make sure that what we do does actually influence things on the ground, to ensure that we get a seat on the decision-making table, maybe we need also to add other skills that will help us. How many amongst us sit on the IPCC table when they talk about climate change and how it affects everyone? We all talk about climate change, but I don't remember seeing many archaeologists there. And how about, the environmental program, but yet we are here, we want to change, we want to talk about migration. God bless you, folks.
In terms of moving, I'm a refugee who ended up in Sweden. So I know the feeling of having different cultures and having to study primary school in one culture and secondary school in another, and the whole cognitive dissonance of what people say they are and what societies tells them they are. And in terms of understanding archaeologists' role in dealing with diversity, in the places where we go to in Africa, where we all work in, there's huge diversity. I think Ethiopia is one of the countries in the world that has highest lexical diversity. And I think places like Somaliland, which are not even on the map officially, you have a great amount of people in the region area who are actually going there as a refuge. People are coming from Yemen, people are coming from Syria, Oromo people are coming from Ethiopia. So Somaliland, which doesn't even exist on the map, is receiving a lot of refugees. So what can we learn from Somaliland? Somaliland's archaeology and history can tell us, explain exactly why so many refugees in Somaliland are thriving. They're doing restaurants, they are owning land, they are becoming very much part of the society. Some Oromo are Muslim, but others are also either traditionalists or Christian. Some Syrians are Muslim, others are Christian. Yemenis are coming. Some are also Jewish, Yemenis. So you have a diversity of community that is coming to a country that doesn't even exist, that doesn't get international aid, because the aid goes to Somalia and they don't want to be seen as Somalia. So they are not receiving. It's remittance. It's people like me who are funding family and relatives there. But the archaeology itself is telling us that this story, this human story of receiving somebody in their time in need, is the kind of stories we need to tell from the archaeology. The site I talked about, Oberhadle, is a sacred landscape. It meant that because it's a Sufi site, it was used to always be where if there was a war, you could always go to Oberhadle and say, I am not part of the war anymore. And it was a safe haven. That's why we can find ancient Christian crosses in situ other Muslim sites, where year after year there are pilgrimages who could have said, let's destroy this Christian site, but they have not. So I think the stories we need to really tell from Africa are the way that Africans have received people from all over the world, and that diversity itself is something very African. People, when they come to Africa, I never thought I would ever come to Europe. I mean, the first 3 years in Sweden, I was pinching myself thinking, this is not happening. I thought I would wake up one day. So most of the refugees coming are still struggling. So I think the kind of archaeology we need to do is one, again, we do need those typologies to know which pottery belongs to which culture. But I think the bigger picture, we have to keep that picture in our minds.
So another great question, Eric. Thank you. So why do we move? I will come back to your question. I think why do people move, especially sometimes in rather tragic manner? Not far from where we are today, you have islands where you have people sinking in the sea, and that's tragic. Therefore, there are major economic, political, societal reasons behind those movements. And the question I think we need to ask, as you put it rightly, is what can we do as archaeologists? I think our role is to not be inflated, again, but know how to converse with those in power so we can have at least a modicum of impact on shifting the narrative from characterizing those people who are moving as invaders, but human beings. I think we can play a role there. That's number one. I live in Chicago, and it could be very cold in winter. But then when we talk with our neighbors, you sometimes find a snake or an opossum, and we call them invasive species. Guess what? Homo sapiens, I think, in Chicago, in winter, are accusing snakes of invasion. For God's sake, we don't belong there. We shouldn't be going out of north and south of the tropics. All of us should go back to the tropics. So we don't belong there. So the psyche of accusing not only other humans, but also snakes and reptiles as invasive is something that we really need to think about and characterize it. Again, I'll say in an archaeological, paleontological, or scientific manner so people can understand, actually, both of us don't belong in my backyard. The snake and me, we don't belong there. We should go back to the tropics. And how do you therefore impact those policymakers so they can make sense? At least they can be human. Understanding the difference between knowledge and power is very important. It's very important. Because we have knowledge, we feel empowered. It doesn't work that way. It's naive. It's very naive. So when I'm asked by policymakers to advise on anything, I always distinguish power and knowledge. Therefore, how do you therefore help them understand the narrative, specifically in terms of people moving? It's inherent to our species that we move. You tell them the story, the big picture. Presidents and prime ministers don't really have the time to go into the nitty-gritty of our typologies and little morphology on the teeth, etc. They don't have the time. So, for example, when President Obama visited Ethiopia, the government of Ethiopia said, what are the 3 things we need to show to attract his attention? And what did they choose? The fossils, Lucy, Salam, My Discovery, and Ardi, the literature or the scripture from the mosque and the church, and then a letter from former King Menelik that was sent against the colonial power. 3. And we had 5 minutes. I had 5 minutes to explain the 6 million years of history. And it caught his attention so much that when he was speaking as the AU, he really talked about human unity. And those things coming out of those mouses, the big mouses, the political, the powerful mouses, are something that we can help shift the narrative. Otherwise, we will be a drop of water in the ocean, and we will be self-congratulating, as someone was saying here. And I think knowing our power, which is not equivalent to our knowledge, is really fundamental. Thank you.
Amazing. All right, I'm going to open it up to the audience again, if we have any questions, before we get some more back and forth here. Any questions from the audience?
I had a statement I wanted to make, but maybe you don't want that. You want a question.
I'm looking for questions right now. Questions for the panel?
Eric, I have a question for the panel. I can tell you, the audience.
Oh.
When you guys say SAfA, hold on a second. Africanist archaeologists, is this archaeologists working in Africa, or is there something called Africanist archaeologists? Can someone educate me? What does it mean?
Anyone want to take a shot at the question? New member of the plenary panel?
Well, you signed up for this. You came in, so you should know what that means.
Here you go.
I'll try to explain, like I explain to my students. We tend to put that IST on the region where we work. So I have colleagues who are South Asianists, I have colleagues who are North Americanists, and then people who work on the African continent tend to call themselves Africanists, and it's a signal to the area where you do your research. I hope that's right. Okay.
I had exactly the same question, thank you, because I was curious, if you look at the word African versus Africanist, and you compare, the European Association of Archaeologists, or the, Society for American Archaeologists, does that not create a distance? Those 3 letters, do they not create a distance from effectively working in the region and being in the region as opposed to studying it from a distance? It's just a curiosity because I didn't understand the point of the Africanist in the name of SAfA.
Pam, I see you have a question too. Shayla.
Okay. So when you say, but do you think that is the distance you're asking, is it particular to the continent of, like being an Africanist, or being like a Mesoamericanist, or being a South Asianist?
It gave me the sense of making our study an other. We created a distance, and maybe that wasn't the implication, but I'm curious, really, it's knowledge. I would like to know.
Well, and I'm not the expert on how this came to be, but for me, it's kind of shorthand, kind of distinguish between a person who's identifying as an African-born person and a person who studies this region of the world in a scholarly manner. Right. So I have never really questioned when, some of my colleagues who work on the Indian subcontinent call themselves South Asianists. Yeah. Yes, you could be like, well, most people don't, is there such a thing as a Europeanist? I don't know. I don't hear it very often, but it's academic shorthand, I guess.
Hi, just to give the specifics, SAfA was originally the Society of Africanist Archaeologists in America. And it was founded by people based in North America who had an interest in African archaeology. It was actually single-handedly created by a man named Professor Peter Shinney, which is why Niamey Akuma, the publication, is Niamey Akuma. It's Akan from Ghana, the term. But basically, I'm getting crazy because I feel when I come here now that I really am an elder, because I first joined in 1977 when my roommate was going to a conference in New Orleans. And she said, you should become a member too. You've done fieldwork in Africa. So I write Peter Shinney. He says, oh yeah, you're a member, no problem. But in the mid-90s, a group in Poznan, Poland, who worked in Egypt, Sudan, the Horn of Africa, basically they wanted to host a SAM meeting. So for the first time ever, it expanded into Europe, and ever since it's been once in Europe, 2 years later in North America. And so it expanded it that way. My personal experience is when it's in Europe, it's easier to bring African colleagues. And I've picked up graduate students by going to SAfA meetings in Europe, just people I've met. And 2 weeks later, they said, well, I'm looking for a PhD program. And just this notion that it's outsiders that are doing this kind of work. My personal experience is that, this started as a society and a research area for basically, either white nationals of African countries or white expatriates. And it basically expanded that within a couple of generations, we've trained African scholars, and most of the important positions worldwide now are held by people that are African. Just look at you guys and the kind of positions that you have now and who held that position originally. So it's been a revolution in terms of who should be doing this and why. In my field area in southern Tanzania, I joke that when I explain to people I'm interested in your history and that's why I'm here, they either laugh at you like you're crazy, and telling them totally fiction, or they say, well, we know our history. Why don't you just talk to us? So we started talking to people, and we try to explain, well, some of this is our history too. And the worst thing to try to explain is paleoanthropology. It's like saying it's my history as well as yours. But just this notion of whose history is it? Even the question we had about what to deal with indigenous people. Who's indigenous in Africa? North of us, there are still hunter-gatherer groups in central Tanzania. They certainly should count as indigenous, but what about the Bantu expansion and people that became the Bantu? Who's indigenous and who counts? I'm Canadian. We're going through similar kind of issues about who should be dealing with pre-Columbian archaeology. And we have whole groups of indigenous people, First Nations, who are looking to archaeology as a way to understanding their history. And we have mixed race people from the fur trade who affiliated with First Nations and are now recognized as an official indigenous group, the Métis. So it's just whose history is it and whose past are we studying? And I hope there'll still be a place when basically countries take over their own work for people like me from outside to try to help out. And we're willing to learn, and certainly things have changed a lot.
Anything else from the back in the back?
Probably mine is not to the panel, but maybe to the general membership. Just a follow-up question. Very exciting, and I think I want to give credit to the Americans for having started SAfA and the European guys taking it up. But my question is, we the Africans, I think I would love to get to a point where Africa gets to host as well, because we are talking about Society for Africanist Archaeology. We are working in Africa. When are we going to get to a time when Africa is going to host SAfA? Thank you.
Yes, one more. Oh, response. Sure.
Martha, thank you very much for your question. I think that's going on the minds of many people. And I think the answer to your question is the time is now. Thank you.
Sorry, Eric.
Got the audience all fired up now.
Thank you very much. It has actually been hosted on the African continent twice before, both in Dakar and at WITS. And there was an experiment in the early, in 2010 and in 2014, to align SAfA also with the other very major, always hosted on the African continent, meeting of the Pan-African Archaeological Association. And that experiment possibly didn't work because, not because anybody was resistant to the idea of SAfA meeting on the African continent. I think I would speak for the majority of people that we all those of us who are clearly not African but have a passion for the archaeology of the continent, that it is appropriate that our meetings, as much as possible, should be held on the continent. But it was because of a structural difference between the two organizations. And there was a long discussion at various SAfA business meetings, both following at Dakar, at WITS, and subsequently, about whether or not trying to marry with the PAA was the most appropriate approach. That shouldn't necessarily rule out SAfA being hosted as an entity without trying to combine with the PAA on the African continent. But I just wanted to point out SAfA has been to the African continent a couple of times. Thank you.
Since 54.
Okay, so we are running short of time now, and in the last 5 minutes of the plenary, our other keynote speaker, Intisar Sagrayon, she has a short statement that she's going to make from Cairo, so she can be involved in this as well. But before we wrap up for that, we have one final question. It's an easy one. In 1 minute or less, I would each like you guys to comment on what do each of you envision to be the next major milestones in archaeology and paleoanthropology in Africa.
Biggest milestone. Yes. For me, this is very easy. One of the biggest issues that we struggle with in Africa is records, databases. We need to have records of archaeological heritage resources, properties on the ground. We are struggling. We were talking about the issues of digital colonization, that a lot of research is taking place in Africa, but the data is not given back to the community where information originates from, whether it's the source community themselves or whether it's government. So it's high time we shift our research focus and make sure that each and every single research that is being conducted on the African continent, the data remain with the source community. Because it's frustrating to be able to pull one single data, even a site within your own country, if you don't have access to data. It's very painful because we can't protect the site if we don't have the data. A lot of sites that are being studied, they are published in scientific journals, which we don't have access to. Sometimes you are an author, and you can get lucky to have an author's copy, but how many people can access to those restricted, very expensive sources? Can we shift, please?
Just pick up very quickly, and maybe not just one thing, but we organized a session on African islands. 3 publishers approached me, and not one of them had any distribution whatsoever in Africa. So hopefully this is something that could be of significant change. I think I would love to see the molecular revolution that's taking place in other parts of the world be adopted and applied in Africa, because there's such relevance here to issues of mobility, for example, but also whether it's disease or otherwise, just really to understanding data resources that could be useful on a much grander scale to populations and communities. But maybe just finally, and I see it's obviously taking place, and it's a incredibly important thing to see through these discussions and so on, but I hope a genuine process of decolonization of the subject on this continent specifically for the benefits of a discipline like archaeology. Because other subjects, global health, ocean science, et cetera, climate science, are paying more attention than we are to this broader systemic problem.
Milestone. Whew. That's a tough one. The first thing maybe for me would be, wouldn't it be wonderful for us to do archaeology in Swahili? So is it possible to have archaeology in African languages? and of course, now we have DeepSeek, ChatGPT, we can always translate and so on. But we can also be a little bit more sophisticated than that. But then what I would also want to see, if I were my archaeologist hat, is that increasingly, archaeology is becoming more and more and more scientific. So what I'm hoping is that we would see the thriving of science-based facilities throughout the African continent, and that is something that would enable collaboration between people resident in different parts of the world, as well as capacitating those who are in Africa. This can also help them to perhaps do some curriculum reform and ensure that some of these interdisciplinary skills, they are also taught on the continent. This can also then produce knowledge which can then be translated into, to support evidence-based decision making. Then my final point is that, and that is to you, Zirey and Krish. We said that this is to be continued. But whenever you talk about science, I also want to hear indigenous science being also mentioned. And I think that would also be a milestone, because this is knowledge which has been tried and tested. It's based on experiments, and it's also based on observation. Thank you.
I think I will follow on the archaeological records line you opened up. We're all active all over Africa, and the digital resources access is very limited to local people. And in Somaliland, because also I'm a diaspora, there's huge Somali diaspora all over the world. The way to reach Somali people to access archaeological sites has been the easiest way, digital. And this is why we set up a Horn Heritage Foundation, which we've digitized about 10 sites. Some of them are up, but also we have active exhibitions, live exhibitions, which constantly we feed into after we gain more information. And I think in terms of milestone, I think access to our research for the public is key, but also MOOC, massive open online courses, free, particularly on African archaeology, maybe regional themes, would be useful, because we all have the knowledge, we all give conference papers, we all travel everywhere. If we can do that from our own living rooms to build African courses, free for people to watch and listen to. Podcasts are very popular. People would love to watch that. People would love to listen to. And I've benefited from using, although I'm not the most digital person, I've benefited from spreading the significance of cultural heritage in at least Somaliland by using digital data. And one last thing, ownership. I know there's a lot of collaboration going on, and I know that the servers are often based for practical reasons outside of Africa. But I would encourage two things. First, have informed consent when you're doing remote mapping of any African country's material. Secondly, negotiate a contract which gives them ownership, or at least co-ownership, of the material. That is if we are honest about decolonization. Thank you.
So thank you, Eric. At least this one is relatively an easy question. So discovery and innovation are going to take us to the next frontier, revolution, which you described. And discovery in my field, in our field, I think is going to go back to the dust, tear, blood, and sweat, which we all love. Field work cannot be replaced by any innovation or revolution or technology, in my opinion. What comes from the dirt is what's going to take us. So field work is going to continue. But molecular biology, in terms of Chris's point, for understanding ancient DNA or our relationships in movement is going to be fundamental. Proteomics, DNA, etc. But all of that, because we are here at SAfA, which pertains to Africa, I think training and paying attention to indigenous people is very, very fundamental. I will slightly defer Shadrach. I don't think there is such thing as indigenous science. I don't think there is such thing as African science. I don't think that, because there is no European science, there is no American science, there is no Chinese science, there is science. So by invoking indigenous science, for me, it's having the indigenous to do science in ways that are consistent with how we understand science to be, because I don't think there is Chinese or American or European science. I think that's fundamental. Otherwise, that may lead to some people in some corners of America or Europe, Africa, doing something and they feel that they are doing science. I think that's a very slippery road. So, yes to indigenous science, but done by indigenous people, as it is done in Europe, which means that we have to bring those techniques, methods, as you and I do it. So I think that's very, very, very critical because, again, the issues of movement and migration, tragic in many cases, really boil down to other political, economic, and power balances. And we can't solve those problems by cornering ourselves in places that may feel comfortable for some time, but are not going to take us out of the woods. Thank you.
Real quick, because we've got Intizar on. Okay. Yeah. We have Intizar Sakrayan from Cairo. She should. Thank you guys, by the way, very much. We'll have our big applause after the question.
Should we go? Should we go back?
Oh, you can guys, you can stay here. You can go do whatever you want.
Oh.
Yes. Hello, everyone.
Hello, Intizar.
Yeah. Good to see all of you. I'm glad to see all of you. Okay. I'm glad also that I made it to at least give my presentation on the first day. So I just would like to add a few comments from what I heard today from you, and also another comment that I have already prepared for another reason. For my colleague who talked about decolonization, and that is not decolonization, but we need first to know the place, to know the landscape, to know the people. Yes, that is very important. But yes, of course, we know the remote sensing, we need the GIS, and we need everything else for our work. But yes, we have to know the landscape, we have to know the people, we have to know the culture before we start digging or before doing anything. But what we are going to do about what already have been done, what already have been interpreted. So what we can do now is just to go back to what have been done and try to read it and to reinterpret what have ever been interpreted for our own culture by others. So this is one step that can help us together to at least to understand our cultures and to use it, in the future to help our people. Now, maybe from this point, actually in Sudan, now scholars already have started advocating a sort of a national approach to interpret or to reinterpret also history and culture and identity through lenses, of course, of indigenous antiquities. I just want to move to archaeology. What are we doing archaeology for? It is not only for the things that we already know, like protecting and documenting the endangered heritage. And I know that Paul Lane is here and he has already told you about mapping the endangered sites in Africa, and also the work that so far has been done in that area. And it is not only also for combating illicit trafficking, but what we need archaeology for is supporting communities and fostering resilience, supporting communities in preserving the identity and preserving the memory. If you know now what happened in the Sudan, the war, okay, let me read just for you the statistics. Displacement since April 2023, over 30 million people, 6.8 million internally displaced, and 3.6 million refugees have been uprooted due to conflict, making Sudan the site of the world's largest. To talk about just another 1 or 2 minutes for this is about the universities. Yesterday I have attended a talk about the archaeology and universities, and for me, I think that it is very important to know about what others are doing in the continent, and where are actually the good examples for research that we are having. And what I discovered that is that we are not on the same level. We are not in the same level. We have new departments of archaeology. We have older one. We have very elaborated ones, and we have others who are lagging behind. So we need to do something as far as these universities, and try to make. To look at the challenges, what we are having, the challenges as far as other universities who are teaching archaeology, what type of archaeology is taught, and how we can help through funding, through looking at the infrastructure, through also examining this brain draining, and through also seeing what we can do as far as capacity building to these nations. So just I would like to thank again Eric and the organizing committee, and to thank you also who are here for listening to my few comments. And I hope that we can try to do something, just getting the example of what is going on now in Sudan. We have been trying and still trying for other sites, like the sites in Northern Sudan, which hasn't been affected by the war, to continue to see what the effect of the displaced people on the sites themselves. We are trying to help actually there. We are following the changing, whether it is positive or negative. And of course, in some cases, we don't have anything to do. And we are also following the climate change again. So thank you so much. And I'm glad that the internet connection is okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Intisar. And I just want to thank again our entire panel, Zurai, Sada, Shadrach, Alma, and Krish. And thank you all for attending. And I'm sure that they're going to be around. Oh, yes, you want to?
Sorry, just an okay. Short note regarding SADA, what you were saying. We do have an online course on African archaeology and heritage at the Coursera platform. We have more than 2,000 students. So just to let you know that it's a project together with the German Archaeological Institute and other institutions in Europe and Africa. So we are building up, and just to let you know, join us.
Thank you, Sophia. And I'm sure you're going to see each of them at the dinner tonight, so feel free to continue these discussions. I know I will have lots of follow-up questions, easy questions. So thank you all. We're going to take a quick 5-minute break. Is that okay? Quick 5-minute break before we start with the SAfA business meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Guys, I should check your email.